Christine Falling. That night, Lise Coleman needed someone to babysit her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had prior experience caring for children, offered to watch the baby at her own home. The following morning, the infant was found dead, with no visible signs of violence or struggle. However, the police investigation uncovered a far darker truth than anyone could have anticipated. Christine Falling had been born on March 12, 1963, in Perry, United States. She was the second daughter of a couple who, even by the standards of that time, would have been considered highly unusual. Her mother, Anne, was still a minor, only 16 years old when Christine was born. The eldest daughter, Carol, had come into the world a little over a year earlier, when Anne herself was just 14 or 15. To this already dramatic family situation was added the striking age gap between Anne and her husband, Thomas, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been exceptional cases where a large age difference does not prevent a marriage from being happy. Unfortunately, that was not the case for Anne and Thomas. Only a few months after Christine's birth, Anne abandoned the household, leaving Christine and her sister Carol in the care of their elderly father, a lumberjack with little to no understanding of child-rearing. Yet, the young mother did not stay away forever. She eventually returned, pregnant once again, and over the next 2 years gave birth to 2 more children, Michael and Earl. Although the family now consisted of 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas insisted that only one of the 4 children was biologically his. It was evident that the family's living conditions were neither stable nor normal. The conflicts between the ill-matched couple grew increasingly frequent and often turned violent. During Anne's absences, Thomas would take the children with him to the forest while he worked, exposing them to harsh and unsafe conditions. Matters worsened when Thomas suffered a work-related accident that left him unable to continue his job. Eventually, Anne made a drastic and final decision. She gathered her 4 children, drove them to a shopping center, sat them down on a bench, and walked away, never to return. Predictably, the children were taken into the care of the social services system, shuffled among orphanages and related institutions. No further records exist regarding the 2 younger boys, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, appeared to have adjusted relatively well, or at least there are no reports suggesting otherwise. Christine, however, followed a very different path. Having endured hardship from birth, she developed mental health issues, intellectual impairments, and violent tendencies. The orphanage staff described her as a habitual liar and thief, prone to breaking rules for attention. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Her relationships with both children and adults were consistently poor. Her struggles worsened when she began to gain excessive weight and suffer from epilepsy. In the harsh environment of an orphanage, Christine became the target of ridicule, bullying, and cruel treatment, further deepening the trauma that had already defined her young life. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol experienced a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also provided a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling was unable to conceive. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which may have influenced their decision to adopt both sisters. Unfortunately, although their surroundings changed, Christine's behavior did not. She remained problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not appropriate for her age. She had frequent fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had developed in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. At times, she would throw them from great heights to test whether it was true that cats had 9 lives. She quickly discovered that it was false, yet she continued her cruel experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife, Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, this place was somewhat more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor did it prevent her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavioral changes in the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Falling household. From that point on, the sexual abuse appeared to have stopped, but the physical violence continued. The breaking point came when the father gave Christine a severe beating for arriving home 10 minutes late. To make matters worse, the next day, he forced her to go to school wearing shorts so that everyone could see the marks of his so-called justice. She was not only mistreated, but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her decision. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the Falling home. However, their newfound independence did not bring better days. At first, the sisters stayed at the home of one of Carol's friends. Christine remained there for about a month and a half before deciding to search for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name could not be confirmed, but who was said to be her stepbrother. Shortly after, the two got married, but the sudden union lasted only 6 weeks, marked by frequent arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these altercations. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he was sleeping. The hasty marriage ended as abruptly as it had begun. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began exhibiting new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times, complaining of a wide range of strange and inconsistent ailments that doctors were unable to diagnose. She always appeared extremely nervous, listing symptoms that did not correspond to any known illnesses. In some cases, potential diagnoses were ruled out through medical testing. On one occasion, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. Another time, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be nothing more than menstruation. Eventually, doctors reached a likely diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a psychological disorder in which a person feigns illness, fabricates symptoms, or even inflicts injuries upon themselves to attract medical attention and, consequently, the concern and sympathy of others. Despite all her peculiar behaviors, considerable weight, evident mental issues, lack of social skills, and untidy appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This reputation allowed her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. At first, everything seemed fine. Her services were well received, and as a result, her occasional babysitting jobs became more frequent. Things appeared to finally be improving for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to take care of a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was only 2 years old and in a very playful stage of her development. Her loved ones affectionately called her Pongacito and delighted in her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy, Christine called emergency services, claiming that the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was promptly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but their efforts were unsuccessful. One of the doctors noticed an unusual bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, her parents, were devastated, and Christine appeared to be deeply affected as well. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy's case had doubts about the reported cause of death. In fact, he suggested that the police be informed about the possibility that there was more to the child's death than a simple accident or infection. At this point, the accounts of what happened differ. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others state that the police were informed but took no action. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note intended for the police, but it never reached them. Finally, other reports assert that the police did summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her, but found no evidence to justify her detention or the opening of a more thorough investigation. What is certain is that the case was never properly investigated, even though the autopsy clearly revealed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. Afterward, apparently heartbroken, Christine decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she gradually began working as a babysitter again, showing the same reliability she had displayed in her earlier jobs. A year had passed since Cassidy Johnson's death, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked Christine to take care of their 4-year-old son, Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine immediately called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing anyone could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, since the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the organ's ability to pump blood. Myocarditis can be caused by a virus, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which in some cases leads to sudden death. With this conclusion, no one suspected the babysitter of any wrongdoing. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis regarding their son's sudden passing. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time, the loss was personal as it involved a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to care for another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed supervision while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, tragedy struck once again. Only a few hours after Joseph had been left with Christine, the boy was dead. Christine claimed she had left him sleeping and then heard a scream. When she rushed to check, she found Joseph lifeless. The medical professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both boys had died from the same cause, myocarditis brought on by an infection. Although no one had any concrete proof or solid argument, rumors began to circulate throughout the town about the strange string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself began saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and while everyone knew she had certain mental disabilities, no one truly believed she could be capable of murdering the children. Consequently, just as quickly as they began, the rumors started to fade. Voices of comfort rose around young Christine, telling her to calm down and assuring her it was merely a series of tragic misfortunes. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was later hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. However, this raised a new question. Had she transmitted to the children a virus that proved fatal for them? Very soon, though, Christine was cleared of any such suspicion when doctors determined there was no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that sheer bad luck was responsible for the deaths. As a result, Christine came to be viewed almost as a victim herself. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be someone whom misfortune relentlessly pursued. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths, or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, she began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister, Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia, but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as one might expect, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was already dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was around 3 a.m., when she had changed his diaper and given him his prescribed medicine. She stated that the baby seemed fine at the time and quickly fell back asleep. Authorities were notified, and an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was believed that Travis had suffered a new respiratory complication or a relapse of the pneumonia he had previously battled. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists discovered internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Around this time, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet regarding Travis's death. She stated that she had already experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she did not understand what was happening, it frightened her deeply. Travis turned out to be Christine's final victim. Medical personnel informed the police that the baby's death had been intentional. Authorities immediately arrested Christine, who soon became infamously known as the babysitter killer. She was subjected to intense police interrogations and psychiatric evaluations, and before long, the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed that she heard voices in her head telling her, kill the baby, which would not stop until she obeyed. She also provided personal reasons for why she had committed the murders. Her statements were both sorrowful and chilling. Speaking about her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said that they had been playing outside and the little girl became very restless. When it was 8 o'clock and Cassidy would not calm down, Christine suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. The child's heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she was no longer breathing. Christine claimed she tried to revive her but failed. In reference to Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl cried constantly, which drove her to rage. She admitted that she placed her hands around Jennifer's neck and squeezed until the child went silent. Regarding Travis, Christine stated that he had been sleeping and that she smothered him for no particular reason. She went on to reveal more horrifying details, telling investigators that she had copied the method from something she had seen on television but added her own variations. She described the act as easy and simple. After admitting that she killed the children without understanding why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose, pressing down until they stopped moving, ensuring that no one could hear them scream. When she learned that she could face the death penalty by electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 murders she had described, insisting that she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were certain that the other 3 victims had also been killed by her, but at that point, proving it would have been extremely difficult, so they chose to leave the matter unresolved. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after being incarcerated, Christine confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old man who died only a few hours after being placed in her care. While in prison, specialists later concluded that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head, as she had previously claimed. Behind bars, she reverted to her old habit of alleging that she suffered from numerous strange illnesses and often visited the prison's medical facilities. Although Munchausen syndrome was never officially diagnosed, when she first applied for parole in 2007, a mental health expert stated that he believed she indeed suffered from the disorder and therefore posed a risk to public safety. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She was again given a parole hearing in 2017, but her request was once more rejected. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues to serve her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it is worth noting that aside from the children officially recognized as her victims, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also attempted to kill. Fortunately, she did not succeed. The first was a 3-year-old girl named Kylie Summerling, who became gravely ill while under Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but fortunately survived. The other 2 were brothers, Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both became seriously ill while being looked after by Christine and required hospitalization, though specific details were not disclosed. The Hale brothers were fortunate and ultimately recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children with babysitters have access to tools that allow them to monitor what happens in their homes while they are away. Security cameras and apps that provide real-time viewing are now available to help safeguard children from potential mistreatment by caregivers. However, things were very different during the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, Christine was once asked what she would like to do if she were ever granted her freedom. Her response was chilling. She said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed she loved children to death. Moving on to the next case. David Kinney. It was a peaceful afternoon on May 7, 2017, in the small town of Bel Air, Ohio, when everything suddenly changed. David Kinney, along with his wife Sherry and their young daughter, went to visit his close friend Brad McGarry. Their purpose was simple, to return a weed trimmer. However, as they approached the house, something felt off. No one responded to their knocks on the front door, and an uneasy sense of worry began to build. David led his family around to the back of the house, where they noticed the service door slightly ajar. Inside, the home was in disarray, with unmistakable signs that something terrible had occurred. Sherry called out Brad's name, but only silence answered. When there was no response, David decided to head down to the basement. What he discovered there would change their lives forever. David Kinney had always been an ordinary young man. When he turned 21, his mother threw him a large party to celebrate the milestone. Among the guests that evening was Sherry, a beautiful single mother who attended with her sons. Throughout the night, David became deeply drawn to her, feeling an immediate connection. The following day, he confided to his mother that he had met the love of his life and was determined to pursue a serious relationship with Sherry. Despite Sherry's admirable character, some people in David's circle questioned his choice to marry a woman with 3 children, arguing that it was a heavy responsibility for someone his age. Nevertheless, David was filled with love and a strong sense of dedication. He was determined to take on the duties of becoming part of Sherry's family and creating a stable, happy home. To ensure he could provide for them, David enrolled in a coal mining course, a difficult and dangerous job, but one that promised good pay to support his household. During this training, he met Brad McGarry. Brad, who was born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio, had faced many hardships growing up. Being openly gay in a conservative community, he endured ridicule and discrimination, but always remained steadfast in living his truth. Over time, Brad built a close circle of loyal friends and initially pursued a career as a hairstylist. However, working in a small, blue-collar town made that profession difficult to sustain. Eventually, Brad made a bold decision to change paths entirely, becoming a coal miner, a drastic shift from his previous line of work. David and Brad soon developed a strong friendship, with Brad quickly becoming close to David's family and earning the affectionate nickname Uncle Brad from his children. The two were inseparable, constantly sharing laughter and good times. By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and their children were growing up. Brad, meanwhile, was balancing his work, family, and a secret romantic relationship. On May 7, 2017, after attending a family gathering, Brad mentioned to a cousin that he needed to return home for a meeting. Later that day, around 6:15 p.m., David, Sherry, and their youngest daughter stopped by Brad's house. They were puzzled when Brad didn't answer the door, even though his car was parked outside. Worried, they went around to the back of the house and discovered the service door unlocked. After calling out to Brad and receiving no reply, David stepped inside while Sherry searched the upper floor. David's search led him to the basement, where he was confronted with a horrifying scene: Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Hearing her husband scream, Sherry hurried downstairs and was equally stunned by the sight. She immediately called 911, and soon after, the police were notified of Brad's death, the victim of a gunshot wound. When the officers arrived, they found David and Sherry visibly distraught as they explained how they had come to check on their friend, only to encounter a tragedy. The couple detailed their close relationship with Brad, describing the deep connection that had formed over the years. The Kinney family mentioned that they often spent holidays with him, and their children adored Brad as though he were an uncle. They had even planned a trip to the Bahamas with him later that summer. When asked whether Brad had any enemies or had been involved in troubling circumstances, David and Sherry told police that Brad had recently ended a turbulent relationship with a man named Scotty, though they didn't know his last name. They explained that the relationship had been volatile, filled with frequent and intense arguments. After gathering as much testimony as possible, the officers began a careful examination of the scene before drawing any conclusions. In the basement, they discovered Brad's body lying face down in a large pool of blood. At first glance, it was evident he had been shot at least once in the head. Despite the clear evidence of violence, the officers initially speculated that Brad might have been struggling emotionally and possibly taken his own life. When the forensic expert arrived, he asked if a weapon had been found, and the officers responded that none had been located. Since it was common for suicide victims to fall on their weapons, the forensic team decided to turn the body over. When they did, there was still no weapon, immediately ruling out the suicide theory. Continuing their survey of the scene, investigators noted that the house appeared to have been ransacked, but in a strangely deliberate way. The kitchen drawers were left open, and the living room was in complete disarray. Initially, detectives theorized that Brad's death might have resulted from a burglary gone wrong. However, after conducting a detailed inspection, they realized that none of the valuable items had been taken, despite there being many to choose from. They also observed that Brad was an avid collector of rustic-style art, with numerous valuable pieces around the home. If theft had been the motive, it made little sense that the television was left untouched and cash was scattered across the floor. Taking all these details into account, investigators began to suspect that the supposed robbery had been staged to throw them off the real motive behind Brad's murder. Given that Brad was an openly gay man working in a coal mine, detectives initially considered the possibility that he might have provoked hostility among his more conservative coworkers, potentially leading to a hate crime. However, after interviewing his colleagues at the mine, they were surprised to learn that everyone spoke highly of Brad, describing him as a kind and well-respected man. This theory was quickly dismissed. Investigators then turned their attention to Brad's close friends and family, hoping to establish a timeline and gather more context about his recent activities. According to David and Sherry's statement at the scene, Brad had recently ended a volatile relationship with a man named Scotty, a fact later confirmed by Brad's friend, Wendy. Wendy told police that she had been strongly opposed to the relationship, explaining that Brad had become overly attached to Scotty and that things between them had grown increasingly strange. Pursuing this lead, detectives obtained Scotty's full name and went to his residence to question him. However, upon arrival, they learned from his mother that Scotty had been incarcerated for the past 3 months for violating probation. Although this ruled out the possibility of his direct involvement, detectives did not entirely dismiss him as a suspect. They speculated that he might have arranged the killing from jail with the help of an accomplice. To be certain, they visited Scotty in prison to inform him of Brad's death and observe his reaction. Scotty appeared genuinely shocked and distressed by the news, and by the end of the interview, detectives were almost certain he had no role in the crime. Running low on leads, investigators decided to canvass the neighborhood to check for security cameras that might have captured footage around Brad's home. Fortunately, A nearby resident had a camera pointed toward the street, offering the possibility of identifying anyone who had entered or exited the area. As they began combing through hours of footage, they continued conducting interviews with Brad's acquaintances. The investigation seemed to be stalling, until 2 days later, when a conversation with one of Brad's cousins dramatically shifted the direction of the case. The cousin revealed that on the day of the murder, Brad had left a family lunch gathering between 1:30 and 2 p.m., mentioning before leaving that someone named DJ was coming over to his house. Brad had even joked that he planned to take a nap with his guest, implying an intimate encounter. The cousin further disclosed that Brad had confided in her about his ongoing affair with a married man who had not yet revealed his sexuality to his wife. Their relationship, she explained, had lasted for years and had been carefully kept secret. Though initially hesitant to reveal the man's identity, she finally relented under pressure from the lead investigator, dropping a shocking revelation. The detectives were stunned to learn that DJ was none other than David, the same man who had discovered Brad's lifeless body. When asked if she was certain about her statement, she confirmed without hesitation that David was indeed the only man Brad had ever mentioned to her. Detectives later admitted that the moment they learned DJ was actually David, the man who had discovered the body while visiting the house with his family, everything suddenly fell into place. Until that point, David had been regarded as a cooperative witness, appearing genuinely devastated by his friend's death. This shocking revelation, however, instantly transformed him from a grieving friend into the primary suspect. Under the pretense of retrieving photos related to the crime scene, detectives convinced David to hand over his phone. In truth, they intended to analyze his location data and look for any signs of a relationship that went beyond friendship. Upon examining the phone's records, investigators discovered that David's device had been at Brad's house during the estimated time of the murder. Although he had attempted to erase incriminating messages, forensic experts recovered deleted texts between the two men that confirmed their intimate relationship. Meanwhile, the surveillance footage from Brad's neighbor's security camera revealed that David had indeed arrived at Brad's home shortly before the killing. Curiously, he had driven there in his wife's car instead of his own. Detectives noted that he remained inside the house for roughly 40 minutes before leaving. Hours later, the same camera captured David returning in his pickup truck, this time accompanied by his wife and daughter, under the guise of delivering a weed trimmer Brad had supposedly borrowed. With this mounting evidence, investigators were confident that David had been at Brad's residence both before and during the time of his death. It was time to confront him. When detectives presented David with the incriminating phone data, he admitted to being at Brad's home, but quickly began shifting his story, giving 7 or 8 conflicting versions of events over the course of the interrogation. At one point, David claimed that a third unidentified man had been in Brad's house, and that during a heated argument, this stranger shot Brad in front of him. He further insisted that the man had threatened his life, forcing him to remain silent and leave the scene. The detective made it clear that he did not believe this account, prompting David to change his story yet again. Under increasing pressure, David finally admitted that he had been hiding an affair from his wife, Sherry. He maintained, however, that the relationship had only lasted a few months rather than years. According to his statement, Brad had not been demanding that he leave his wife, but tensions had escalated when David tried to end their affair that afternoon, leading to Brad's anger and confrontation. David alleged that Brad had brandished a gun, waving it in his face, which terrified him. He said the argument escalated into a physical struggle, during which he managed to wrestle the gun away and shot Brad in the forehead, asserting that he had acted in self-defense. David also admitted to firing another shot at Brad while he was on the ground. The detectives quickly refuted this version of events, pointing out that the basic laws of physics made David's account impossible. The forensic analysis of Brad's body revealed that he had been shot twice, both times in the back of the head, indicating that the shooter had been standing behind him. When asked about the weapon, David claimed he had disposed of it while fleeing the scene. Law enforcement officers were seen combing the area in the days that followed, but the murder weapon was never recovered. Despite the missing weapon, the investigators were certain they had their man. Before taking David to jail, they allowed him to speak with his wife. The conversation between David and Sherry was closely observed by the detectives. David confessed to Sherry about the affair and expressed regret for not handling things differently, admitting that he couldn't undo what had been done. Sherry, shocked by the enormity of his revelation, was left speechless. David reiterated to her what he had told the detectives. Sherry, through tears, asked him if he was mocking her with such an explanation and said she couldn't even bear to look at him. This conversation confirmed to the police that Sherry had no prior knowledge of the events that had transpired behind her back. On May 9th, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators hypothesized that Brad, frustrated with keeping their relationship a secret, had likely threatened to reveal the truth to Sherry, giving David the motive to kill his friend and maintain his double life. After several days in custody, David appeared in court for a marathon preliminary hearing held in mid-May 2017. There, he faced charges for the murder of Brad. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor as the investigating officers testified, and the prosecutors focused on the inconsistencies in the story he had told them. The police described how David had appeared visibly distraught at the scene of Brad's murder, experiencing physical discomfort, including trouble breathing and episodes of vomiting. He also recounted David's initial written statement, in which he claimed to be a simple friend who had gone to deliver a weed trimmer and had inadvertently discovered Brad's lifeless body in the basement. The lead investigator presented David's final statement, in which he confessed to shooting Brad in self-defense with a weapon that, despite exhaustive efforts, was never found. The autopsy results were a critical turning point that completely dismantled David's self-defense claim, as they showed that the victim, Brad, had been shot twice in the back of the head, which was inconsistent with an act of self-defense. David's defense attorney addressed the court, arguing that David did not pose a threat to society and that the tragic events leading to Brad's death were the result of unique circumstances. He asserted that if a crime had been committed, it was manslaughter, not murder, and claimed that David had acted in self-defense. Meanwhile, David remained silent during the nearly 3-hour hearing, where witnesses took the stand. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, the judge found probable cause to send the case to the county court and set bail at $1 million. David's defense immediately requested a reduction in the bail amount, arguing that it was impossible for David to pay. However, the judge denied the request. Several weeks later, David's defense attorney filed more than a dozen motions during a hearing. Among these motions was another request to reduce David's bail. Numerous friends and family members of David attended the hearing to show their support. The lawyer asked that the bail be reduced to $250,000, an amount that the Kinney family could manage. He called several witnesses to the stand, including David's wife, his mother, his father-in-law, and his stepfather. All of them testified to David's good character, describing him as an honorable, hard-working, and responsible man, as well as a loving husband and father. Sherry testified that her husband had provided emotional and material support to their 3 children for the past 10 years, even though he was not their biological father. During cross-examination, Sherry was questioned about the events of May 7th when David took her and their daughter to Brad's house. She said her husband told her they were going to return a weed trimmer. When asked by the judge if her husband had acted strangely that day, Sherry said she did not notice anything unusual at the house. She described how they arrived, knocked on the door, found the back door open, and entered the house, which appeared to have been ransacked before David went to the basement and shouted for her to call 911. After hearing all the arguments, the judge concluded that the testimonies regarding David's character did not justify a reduction in bail. He based his decision on the fact that the defendant had taken his wife and daughter to a house where a dead body was present, under the pretense that he was just passing by and was unaware of what had happened. The judge added that David had blatantly lied to his wife and daughter. Later, David's trial began and lasted for a week. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence we've already discussed, such as the neighbor's surveillance video showing David arriving at Brad's house before the time of the crime and returning later with his family. The prosecution also showed police body cam footage that clearly demonstrated David had been lying from the start. One of the most striking pieces of testimony came from a forensic expert who discussed the DNA evidence found at the scene. The expert revealed that the DNA from a used condom showed Brad's DNA on the outside and the DNA of an unknown male on the inside, but there was no trace of David's DNA. This revelation was controversial because it contradicted the accusations made by a detective who believed that David had decided Brad had to die to keep his secret and his family life intact. According to the detective, David had lured Brad with the promise of sex, killed him, and then covered up the crime as best he could. Meanwhile, the defense maintained that David had acted out of fear and in self-defense. Although the defense attorney conceded that David had not always been truthful and that some of his actions appeared strange, he maintained that these behaviors did not make David a murderer. The prosecution countered by asserting that firing 2 bullets into the back of a man's head could not be considered self-defense, emphasizing that Brad had been on his knees when he was first shot in the upper part of his head and then again in the lower portion of his skull. After both sides delivered their closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense as they returned, and when the judge read the unanimous verdict, David Kinney was found guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad. Gasps and tears filled the room as the verdict was announced. Before sentencing, David was given the chance to speak. He began by apologizing to Brad's family for the pain and suffering he had caused, stating that he had never intended for any of it to happen and wished he could undo everything. David admitted that no apology could ever bring Brad back, but insisted that he truly regretted what had occurred. However, the judge remained unmoved by his words. He recalled the numerous lies David had told to cover up his actions and described the crime as a cold, calculated execution followed by a deliberate cover-up. The judge stated that David had premeditated Brad's murder, luring him with the promise of sex, staging the crime scene, and taking multiple steps to conceal what he had done. The judge had 4 sentencing options, all involving life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole after 20, 25, or 30 years. David's defense attorney pleaded for one of these options, arguing that his client had been a law-abiding citizen with no criminal history prior to that tragic day. The prosecution, however, urged the judge to impose life without parole, stressing that Brad had lost his life and that his family would have to bear that loss forever. The judge responded that if David was capable of killing someone who loved him and considered him a best friend, it raised serious doubts about what he might do to someone who opposed him. For that reason, the judge concluded David could never be allowed to return to public life. In February 2018, David was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with an additional 3 years for a firearm specification, meaning he had used a weapon during the commission of the crime. Police later remarked that the entire case was a preventable tragedy, one that might never have happened if David had not been so intent on concealing his homosexuality. As of mid-2023, prison records showed that David remained incarcerated in Ohio. Since his conviction, his attorney had filed multiple appeals in an attempt to obtain parole eligibility for his client, but every appeal had been denied. In the end, while David would never return to the coal mines, neither would Brad. Their lives had both been irreversibly destroyed by David's choices. Moving on to the next case. DuPont de Ligony's family. In early April 2011, for the first time in years, the shutters of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann stayed closed. This residence, located in a quiet neighborhood of Nantes, France, belonged to the DuPont de Ligony's family. The family consisted of Xavier, Agnes, and their 4 teenage children. The unusual silence surrounding the normally lively household quickly drew the attention of the neighbors. Typically filled with the laughter of the children and the barking of their 2 dogs, the sudden stillness felt alarming. Known for keeping their shutters open even when they were away on vacation, the closed house prompted neighbors to notify the local police, fearing something might be wrong. During their first inspection, the officers found no sign of the family. However, on their 5th visit, they made a horrifying discovery. Located in the western suburbs of Paris, Versailles is where Xavier Dupont de Ligony was born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of the French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligony and his wife, Geneviève Therese Maitre. In 1966, the family welcomed a daughter named Christine. When Bernard left his wife for another woman, Xavier took on the role of head of the family, caring for his mother and sister Christine. Geneviève claimed to receive divine revelations, which she recorded through automatic writing, much like a surrealist poet. Her unusual spiritual beliefs evolved into apocalyptic sermons, ultimately leading her to found a sect called the Church of Philadelphia. The group attracted several members of the aristocracy, whom Geneviève convinced they were chosen to survive the end of the world and help rebuild it afterward. Christine was designated by her mother to bear the Savior, a child who, according to Geneviève, would be the reincarnation of both Jesus and Satan, destined to bring salvation. Although Xavier inherited his father's noble title, he showed little regard for traditional French values, instead being drawn to luxury, fast cars, and eccentric lifestyles. He also deeply admired the United States. Genevieve financed Xavier's extravagant habits through large financial contributions from cult members who had been sworn to secrecy about their activities. In 1974, on the idyllic island of Brihat, Xavier met Emmanuel Tenure. The two boys developed a strong bond built on mutual understanding, one that would last for many years. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier during that time, but despite the rejection, their friendship remained steadfast. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnes Hodanger. Born on November 9, 1962, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris, she was known for her deep religious faith. She worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where she also taught catechism. Although little is known about her family background, it is well established that Xavier and Agnes formed a close relationship, which developed into a passionate yet brief romance before they eventually went their separate ways. In 1990, Agnes gave birth to her first child, Arthur, from a brief relationship. Shortly afterward, she and Xavier reconnected, rekindling their romance and ultimately deciding to marry. Xavier adopted Arthur as his own son. 2 years later, they welcomed their first child together, Thomas, the heir to the family name. To mark the occasion, Xavier chose his close friend Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas's birth, the couple had 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 appeared to represent the perfect household, with Xavier seen as a devoted father and the children performing well in school, suggesting a bright future ahead. Agnes was deeply committed to passing her faith on to her children, regularly taking them to church. Fellow parishioners described her as kind yet strict with her children. Around the year 2000, motivated by their interests and ambitions, Xavier relocated the family to the United States. A discreet, charming, and multilingual man, he believed he could easily integrate into American society. However, the venture failed, resulting in considerable financial losses. Upon returning to France, Xavier began accumulating large debts tied to his various professional pursuits, which were often vaguely defined. Several investigations have described him as a salesman. According to French media, financial difficulties had plagued Xavier for many years. One of his failed projects involved a peculiar plan to import American cars into France. He also launched several small-scale businesses, all of which achieved limited success. These included a hotel and restaurant directory for traveling sales representatives, a restaurant loyalty program, an organization called the French Federation of Commerce, and another discrete company where he served as the listed manager. The financial activity of this last venture was minimal, and in 2003, he employed 6 salespeople. Xavier's work frequently kept him away from home from Monday to Friday and generated only a modest income, about $4,200 a year in declared earnings. Over time, financial struggles began to place serious strain on the marriage, likely intensified by typical domestic disputes. In 2004, Agnes wrote extensively on a French online forum about the difficulties she and her husband were facing. She notably mentioned that he had once told her that a collective family death would not be a catastrophe. By 2009, mounting debt had deeply damaged their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this time, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for the family's financial collapse and accusing her of being responsible for their misfortunes. The emotional distress weighed heavily on Agnes, causing her to lose her appetite and suffer from insomnia. On several occasions, Xavier turned to his lifelong friend Emmanuel for support. Emmanuel, who came from a wealthy family, had inherited a considerable fortune from his father. Despite his affluence, he lived modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric man, he never hesitated to lend Xavier large sums of money. Beyond financial help, Emmanuel also paid for Xavier's trips and even co-signed for the house where Xavier would eventually settle with his family in the late 2000s. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity, the family lived in a chalet located in the suburbs at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, west of Nantes. Once they settled in, neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was strict and less approachable than her husband. Behind the walls of the home, however, Agnes endured a personal torment. She saw Xavier as both fragile and, paradoxically, excessively rigid, almost militaristic. A traditional man, Xavier insisted on being the head of the household, yet he was emotionally detached, showing little tenderness or affection, and at times even behaving abusively. Agnes confided in her friends from the Thursday prayer group about her fears of how Genevieve, Xavier's mother, continued to exert influence over him. She described her mother-in-law as a mentally unstable mystic and admitted she was deeply frightened of her. On January 20th, 2011, Xavier's father, Bernard, passed away. Given the contrast between his father's refined lifestyle and his own financial struggles, Xavier hoped that Bernard's death would bring him an inheritance. However, he was soon met with disappointment. Upon examining his father's estate, he found nothing of real value. Only a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier immediately took. Within hours of Bernard's death, he withdrew money using his father's bank card. On February 2nd, Xavier obtained a firearms license, and by March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle. During this time, he also acquired quicklime. He began practicing with the rifle in his garden, shooting at a balloon mounted on a stand. Emmanuel, who visited him around that period, even tried the rifle himself, but noticed nothing unusual. Xavier explained that the silencer was merely to prevent disturbing the neighbors. On Friday, April 1st, the two friends went together to a shooting range, where Bernard's inherited rifle drew attention. The next day, Emmanuel phoned Xavier 5 times, and they spoke for nearly an hour. Investigations later suggested that the horror began on Sunday, April 3rd. That evening, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the cinema and later enjoyed dinner at a restaurant. Everyone was present except Thomas, who was studying at a Catholic university and living in a nearby student residence. After their evening out, the family returned to their home, where neighbors saw them, and several family members exchanged text messages with friends and acquaintances. Xavier also texted his sister Christine to tell her about their dinner outing. The most widely accepted theory is that Xavier drugged his wife and children, waited until they were asleep, then shot them and buried their bodies in the garden. He did the same to the family's 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier's alibi was as grim as his actions. Early Monday morning, beginning around 6 a.m., he started contacting people connected to his family circle. He phoned Agnes's workplace to report that she was unwell and contacted the children's schools, claiming that Arthur, Agnes's son from a previous relationship, had been in a motorcycle accident while Anne and Benoit were sick. By midday, he sent a letter to the restaurant where Arthur worked, stating that Arthur was resigning because his father had been transferred to Australia. At that point, the only family member Xavier still needed to deal with was Thomas. On that same Monday, April 4th, Xavier reached out to Thomas and had dinner with him at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his dorm. The following day, Thomas received an urgent message from his father, claiming that Agnes had suffered a bicycle accident and was in a mild coma at the hospital, prompting him to travel immediately to Nantes. It is believed that Xavier killed Thomas in the same way as his mother and siblings. Later that evening, Emmanuel spoke to Xavier once again, this time for just under 19 minutes. Around midnight, one of Thomas's friends received a text message from him, saying he was at home watching a movie with his father. However, by that time, Thomas was almost certainly already dead. About an hour later, Xavier sent an email to Emmanuel, suggesting they meet soon. Emmanuel replied, reminding him that he still held power of attorney and that the key was on the sailboat. Contrary to what one might expect, Xavier did not attempt to conceal his movements. He was seen coming and going from the house, even leaving a note on the front door requesting that no more mail be delivered. Instead of staying hidden, he withdrew money from ATMs, his face captured by security cameras. He paid for meals with his credit cards and stayed in hotels under his real name. As Xavier's calculated escape unfolded, neighbors began noticing increasingly disturbing signs. The once open shutters of the chalet had been closed for days. The local children no longer saw the Dupont de Ligonn's kids, the dog's barking had stopped, and Agnes had not returned to work. It was as if the entire family had vanished into thin air. Growing uneasy, the neighbors alerted the authorities. Upon inspection, officers found a refrigerator containing only a few jars of preserves, a damp mop left in the kitchen, a chessboard set up on the living room table, and guitars resting on a sofa. It looked as though the family had simply disappeared. The atmosphere inside was chilling. Beds were stripped of their sheets, photo frames stood empty, and several items of clothing were missing from the closets. Amid the growing mystery, on April 9th, a letter surfaced that had been sent to family and friends. In it, Xavier claimed he had been recruited by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that his family had to go into hiding as part of a witness protection program, explaining their abrupt disappearance and lack of communication. Suspicion and concern mounted among neighbors, who found the story implausible. Fearing the worst, they pressed the authorities to investigate further. Meanwhile, Xavier began traveling through southern France in his car. As the case drew nationwide media attention, more unsettling details about his past started to emerge. On April 15th, security cameras recorded Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, took a single bag with him, and then walked into the nearby woods. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. Coincidentally, on that same day, Emmanuel called his mother and confessed long-hidden truths. He was homosexual, struggled with alcoholism, and suffered from depression. Meanwhile, responding to the neighbors' growing concern and the absence of any concrete leads, the authorities decided to conduct another inspection of the family home. On April 21, 2011, an officer noticed a section of freshly disturbed soil beneath the terrace. When they began to dig, they uncovered a layer of concrete, and moments later made a gruesome discovery. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children were found, wrapped in plastic and buried together, each with 2 to 3 gunshot wounds, their graves adorned with religious symbols. The victims had been carefully placed in burlap sacks and covered with quicklime to hasten decomposition. The family's 2 Labrador dogs were buried alongside them. Despite an extensive forensic search, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or usable DNA evidence were found in the house. Xavier quickly became the most wanted man in France, accused of orchestrating the brutal killings. His face dominated newspaper covers and television broadcasts, earning him grim nicknames such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Killer, and the Face of Horror. Yet, it appeared as if he had simply vanished from existence. The autopsy results confirmed that the murders had been executed with chilling precision. Most victims had been shot in the head at close range. Furthermore, toxicology tests revealed traces of sedatives in the children's systems, confirming the theory that they had been drugged before being shot as they slept. Another disturbing clue came from Agnes's bedroom. Her sleep apnea machine had stopped functioning precisely at 3:27 a.m. on April 4th, suggesting the exact moment of her death. Investigators speculated that Xavier might have hesitated when it came to killing Thomas, as he was the heir to the family name. Because of Xavier's long and intimate friendship with Emmanuel, the latter was soon summoned for questioning. Emmanuel appeared cooperative in the initial stages, expressing his belief that Xavier's disappearance might represent a kind of pilgrimage before committing suicide. When asked about the rifle, however, Emmanuel initially denied any knowledge of it. But further investigation into his background began to expose inconsistencies. Authorities soon realized that Emmanuel was not entirely who he appeared to be. A major breakthrough occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police searched Emmanuel's apartment, seizing his laptop. During questioning, Emmanuel finally admitted what he truly knew about Xavier's rifle. An examination of his hard drive uncovered an extensive collection of correspondence between him and Xavier, messages that ranged from casual to deeply philosophical, sometimes carrying an oddly intimate or cryptic tone. One particular email, sent in the early hours of April 6th, drew the investigators' special attention. The accumulating evidence led police to suspect that Emmanuel might have played a role in aiding Xavier's disappearance. But Emmanuel was not the only suspect. Christine also drew the investigators' scrutiny. During their interviews, Christine and Genevieve were evasive, painting a superficial picture of Xavier and denying any knowledge of the Church of Philadelphia. Genevieve spoke about Xavier's childhood, but avoided uncomfortable topics such as the source of their income, and she outright denied the existence of the sect. However, the diligence of the investigative team paid off. They discovered a copy of a complaint filed years earlier by former sect members who had fled in fear after Christine proposed to have sex with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which included wealthy members providing financial support, was crucial. Investigators believe this environment might have offered Xavier logistical and material assistance. As a result, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the police monitored the sect's followers, hoping to catch any slip-ups in conversation or email. Despite these efforts, no definitive leads emerged. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records allowed authorities to trace his movements within the country. The last concrete trace of Xavier was a security recording from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he was carrying the weapon in his bag based on its shape. While everything suggested he might have committed suicide in the woods, the detectives were puzzled as exhaustive searches in the dense forest yielded no body or remains. This led to the theory that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and taken to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued. On May 4th, Nantes police contacted the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to verify if Emmanuel or Xavier owned a motorboat or sailboat. They found nothing, although they knew the records might not be fully up to date. On May 9th, Emmanuel was summoned to the Nantes police station for another interview, which was, in fact, an interrogation. The police were now focused on finding a boat and identifying its captain. At this point, Emmanuel was unaware of the depth of the investigation or the suspicion surrounding him. When questioned about a reference to a sailboat, Emmanuel explained it as a coincidence. He revealed that he had given Xavier power of attorney to access his safe deposit box. Should anything happen to Emmanuel, the key was stored on a model sailboat in an apartment. The safe contained his will, and that was all. The police let Emmanuel go, feeling frustrated and empty-handed. Despite the coincidences, the investigation remained uncertain. At this stage, Emmanuel was seen merely as a witness. No arrests had been made, and the police debated the point of further interrogating him, though they decided to apply some pressure as he remained the most credible accomplice. A significant detail emerged when investigators reviewed all checks issued to Xavier's company. They found an unusual check for $4,200 signed by Emmanuel. The address on the check indicated a previously unknown account in Monaco. An immediate request for the account statements was sent, but Monaco's strict banking privacy laws meant the authorities there would only respond to their own regulatory agencies. On September 28th, four police officers visited Emmanuel's residence again. After several long minutes, Emmanuel appeared, disoriented and dressed only in his underwear, barely able to confirm his identity. The sparse interior of his apartment was strewn with empty bottles of alcohol, a reflection of his deep isolation and despair. He had not received any letters or phone calls from his old friend, and that silence tormented him. The police no longer regarded him as a suspect, but rather as a broken man, a castaway of circumstance, prompting them to wonder if they had been pursuing the wrong trail all along. By then, Xavier had become one of the most wanted fugitives in France, perhaps even in the world. In 2015, a journalist claimed to have received a letter from Xavier stating that he was still alive. Handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses were performed, but the results provided no conclusive evidence and offered no new leads. On January 9, 2018, police raided a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argens following a tip that a monk there bore a striking resemblance to Xavier. After 2 hours of thorough searching, it was confirmed to be another case of mistaken identity. Less than a year later, on January 18, 2019, Emmanuel died of a heart attack. That same year, authorities arrested a man at Glasgow Airport in Scotland who they initially believed to be Xavier. Once again, the lead proved false. Another theory later emerged suggesting that Xavier might be living in South America, particularly in Argentina, where his fluency in English and charisma could allow him to blend in easily. Over the years, the Church of Philadelphia, founded by Xavier's mother, has not only endured but reportedly experienced a revival. This small, highly secretive sect includes members who have remained loyal for nearly 4 decades, living in near-total seclusion. In the summer of 2019, 2 brothers raised within the sect filed new complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For the past 20 years, both women have passionately maintained that Xavier is alive, innocent, and residing in the United States under witness protection. They insist that the contents of the April 9th letter are fabricated. Such claims might seem like pure denial, yet they could also serve as a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth. Since 2011, the case has remained entangled in speculation, false leads, and dead ends, leading investigators through an endless maze. The haunting question persists: will justice ever be delivered for Agnes and her children? Despite the grim uncertainty, there are still those who believe that one day, the truth will finally emerge. Moving on to the next case. Jonathan. In the mid-1990s in Spain, two young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied social norms by marrying before reaching the legal age of adulthood. For them and their community, navigating everyday life was already a complicated matter. The Romani people, officially recognized by the European Union, have resided in Europe for nearly 1,000 years. Today, they represent the continent's largest ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million individuals. Despite their considerable presence, the Romani continue to endure grave hardships, from school segregation and forced evictions to confinement within impoverished ghettos. They also face severe restrictions on employment opportunities based solely on ethnic background, as well as limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. To date, no initiative introduced by the European Union's governing institutions has succeeded in effectively addressing these ongoing inequalities. Yet, despite these formidable circumstances, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and resolved to build a life together. Adding another striking element to their story, particularly from a Western perspective, was the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata held a distinctive dual role in Rosa's life, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, while also serving as matriarch to 4 other children. Within their Romani community, there existed a deep-rooted emphasis on maintaining unions within the extended family as a means of safeguarding cultural heritage and preserving lineage. Such marriages were often prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, commonly referred to as peos. At just 15 years old, Rosa and Marcelino began their journey into family life. Their first child, Adolfo, was born soon after, distinguished by his traditionally Romani appearance, dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately nicknamed him Diablo Moreno, meaning dark-skinned devil. Not long after, their second son, Jonathan, came into the world. In contrast to his brother, he possessed a fairer complexion, giving him the appearance of a peo. His bright blue eyes gleamed like sunlight dancing upon the sea, and his tousled blonde hair earned him the enduring nickname Chucky, inspired by the wild-haired doll from the infamous 1990s horror film. The young family lived in modest conditions alongside Immaculata, sharing a small, 2-room wooden dwelling with outdoors, situated within the Romani settlement of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This community primarily consisted of extended relatives who relied on collective cooperation to endure persistent financial hardship. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, belonged to an established Romani clan that had shifted from agricultural work to scavenging and selling various low-cost goods, ranging from garlic to brass, in their struggle to survive. Amid these difficult circumstances, Rosa and Marcelino learned they were expecting a third child, even as Jonathan was still an infant. Their happiness, however, proved to be heartbreakingly brief. On the ill-fated morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, who was only 19 years old at the time, lost his life in a tragic accident. He had been sitting in the back seat of a car that collided at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Soon after Marcelino's devastating death, Rosa gave birth to a baby girl, whom she named Carmen. Sadly, Marcelino was no longer alive to cradle his newborn daughter in his arms, leaving Rosa as yet another young Romani mother forced to confront the difficulties of raising her children on her own. This situation was all too common among impoverished Romani families, who neither controlled profitable antique trades nor took part in major drug trafficking networks. Over time, they had also lost the traditional craft of basket weaving, which had once supplemented their income. The days of agricultural work were long behind them. They had moved into the city, surviving by scavenging whatever they could find. Despite these hardships, they sought to remain united and preserve the customs that made them feel rooted, no matter their surroundings. Life pressed forward for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, shortly after 2 p.m., in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, the family gathered to honor Marcelino's birthday. Had he survived, he would have turned 21 that day, 2 years after his fatal accident. In Romani tradition, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered and commemorated. To observe the occasion, many members of the community visited the cemetery to place flowers and pay their respects. Within Romani culture, the lives of the departed are celebrated alongside the life they could have lived, however short it may have been. That afternoon, children ran and played freely after finishing their meals, while the adults divided their attention among various activities. Some were out scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and several had gone to the cemetery to honor Marcelino's memory. Among the children, all cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By then, he was 2 years and 8 months old, full of energy and liveliness. On that particular afternoon, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was responsible for watching him. She decided to take him and a few of his young cousins on a short outing to a nearby shopping center called Prica. They walked around for some time, enjoyed a few sweets, and eventually decided to take pictures together in a photo booth. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when Isabel retrieved the printed photographs, she suddenly realized that Jonathan was missing. Panicked, she searched frantically throughout the Prica Mall, going in and out repeatedly while calling out his name. When her desperate efforts yielded no results, she hurried back to their community to alert the family. By that evening, after Jonathan's disappearance was officially reported to the authorities, the National Police joined the search operations, and by the next morning, firefighters were also participating in the effort. Recognizing the seriousness of the missing child situation, no one treated the matter lightly. Even search dogs were deployed, yet they failed to uncover any trace of Jonathan's whereabouts. Authorities quickly dismissed the possibility that Jonathan had simply wandered off and become trapped in nearby natural terrain or construction debris. In particular, the M45 highway, which was under construction and located not far from their settlement, was thoroughly examined but ruled out as a potential site where Jonathan might be. The following day, both print and television outlets reported the disturbing news of a Romani child abducted in broad daylight from a shopping mall. The story shocked and alarmed the public, underscoring the urgency and gravity of the situation. The community and law enforcement persisted in their search, clinging to the hope of finding any lead that could reunite Jonathan with his family. In response, Rosa's and Marcelino's relatives activated their strong communal network, assembling more than 200 Romani individuals from several cities, including Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. They searched the outskirts of Madrid tirelessly, day and night. Despite limited financial means, they produced makeshift flyers and distributed them at nearby gas stations, though every effort proved fruitless. As hours turned into days, despair deepened. Investigators returned to Prica, the location of Jonathan's disappearance, and examined the available security footage, but the outdated technology rendered it useless. A woman who claimed to have been present at the mall that ill-fated Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark-skinned man giving a child resembling Jonathan a bag of sweets before guiding him toward a children's ride. She later claimed to have spotted them again at a cafe, where the man had a beer before leaving with the boy. However, her testimony could not be substantiated. The lead investigator reassured the public that the case was being treated as a top priority and even issued an international alert through Interpol. Alongside Jonathan's photograph, they distributed his physical description: blue eyes, blonde hair, about 3.3 feet tall, weighing roughly 55 pounds, with milk teeth, and wearing a blue one-piece outfit. Determined to leave no stone unturned, his family plastered Madrid with posters displaying Jonathan's image and a contact phone number. Tragically, many of the numerous calls received were neither sincere nor useful. Several theories emerged, yet none yielded concrete answers. The idea of abduction became increasingly convincing, both within the family and from the perspective of law enforcement. One possible angle investigated was a conflict between different Romani clans. Police questioned dozens of individuals, and the regional government delegate at the time, Francisco Javier Anzurdigui, personally met with leaders of various Romani families in Madrid. Each denied having any knowledge of the child's disappearance and insisted that Jonathan was not in the custody of any clan. Financial motives were also examined as a potential factor. The family disclosed that they were awaiting a substantial insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000, following Marcelino's death, making it plausible that someone sought to claim the funds. They were soon tormented by a series of unsettling phone calls from a man with a hoarse voice, who claimed to have Jonathan but issued no demands. Although the police pursued this lead, it produced no results. Even more distressing were other calls in which the sounds of a crying child could be heard, intensifying the family's agony. These calls were eventually traced to a mentally unstable woman who had been using a doll to mimic a child's cries. As the days dragged on with no ransom demand, the theory of a financially motivated kidnapping grew increasingly improbable. After 2 agonizing weeks, Jonathan's whereabouts remained completely unknown. During this time, the constant ringing of the family's phone only worsened their emotional suffering. The calls came from curious journalists or sympathetic individuals offering words of encouragement, but none brought tangible assistance. Jonathan continued to dominate the headlines, yet the media attention yielded no progress in locating him. Immaculata, only 38 years old and already a grandmother, embodied the hardships endured by the impoverished Romani community. Despite her own grief, she tried to keep her family's morale intact while supporting her niece Rosa, a young widow now facing the disappearance of her child. Amid the devastation, Rosa struggled to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to grasp the tragedy surrounding her. Rosa's health rapidly deteriorated. She ate little and seemed to waste away from within. A report in El País painted a grim portrait of their settlement, Las Castellanas, a muddy shantytown composed of makeshift dwellings sheltering 50 to 60 families, surrounded by frail, apathetic dogs. The scene captured the bleakness of life on society's edge. In the summer of 2000, Rosa finally received the insurance payout for Marcelino's untimely death. Although it provided momentary relief, the 14 million pesetas she obtained were far less than expected. Determined to find her missing son, she allocated 7 million pesetas as a reward for any information leading to Jonathan's recovery. The remaining funds were spent on a van and thousands of flyers bearing his photo. Rosa also bought additional telephones to handle incoming leads and, joined by relatives, embarked on an unrelenting search. They traveled across Spain and even ventured into France and Portugal in hopes of finding Jonathan. Sadly, their efforts only deepened their despair and sense of futility. At just 21 years old, Rosa vowed to continue searching for her son, even if it meant traversing the entire country on foot with only a cane for support. As days turned into months, 6 grueling months passed before Rosa's fragile hope was cruelly shattered. One evening, while watching television, the family was stunned by a breaking news report. A truck driver had discovered skeletal remains barely a kilometer and a half away from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the proximity, it was feared that the discovered remains might belong to Jonathan. The announcement shocked the close-knit Romani community and shattered the last vestiges of hope that the boy might still be alive. Interestingly, media outlets reported that this very location had supposedly been thoroughly searched during the initial desperate efforts to find Jonathan. The bones were discovered near the construction zone of Madrid's EME45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to inspect the area before unloading soil from the project. Upon spotting the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and alerted the authorities, even as soil continued to be dumped on the site. The police responded promptly, using heavy equipment to excavate a fractured skull and several ribs that bore no visible signs of violence. Close to where the remains were found, investigators came across children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded yet still intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother recognized these garments as the same ones Jonathan had been wearing on the day he vanished. For the family, the grim reality of what had happened became undeniable. Authorities, however, instructed them to wait for DNA analysis to confirm the identity of the remains. 1 week later, the results verified that the bones did indeed belong to Jonathan. Overcome with grief upon receiving the confirmation, Rosa, his mother, was hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation of the remains brought a sorrowful end to the prolonged search, forcing the family to confront the devastating truth of their loss and the pressing need to obtain justice for Jonathan. The emotional strain of 6 relentless months spent searching culminated in the unbearable discovery of his remains. Questions soon arose over whether the site where the bones were found had been properly examined earlier. The local security official explained that this particular area had been overlooked, as it was considered beyond the radius where Jonathan was likely to be located. This discrepancy sparked conflicting views among the authorities and the community. Some believed the remains had been there from the beginning, while others suspected they had been placed there more recently. A frequent scavenger and the landowner of the site both reported never having seen anything out of the ordinary. Police avoided making any assumptions about how the fragmented skull, jawbone, and ribs ended up near the construction zone. Nevertheless, The regional governor suggested that the remains might have been transported there by a truck depositing soil for the ongoing works. The family held firmly to their conviction that Jonathan had been abducted, maintaining that he would never have wandered off on his own. They emphasized, however, that they did not accuse anyone directly, explaining that had they possessed such certainty, they would have pursued their own retribution in accordance with the Romani principle of an eye for an eye. Clarity continued to elude the investigation, as forensic analysis of the remains failed to determine the cause of Jonathan's death. He was buried in a small white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 mourners, all struggling to process the unresolved tragedy. Throughout the ceremony, Rosa appeared utterly broken, unable to restrain her tears and suffering repeated fainting spells. Although the case technically remains open, the police have made no meaningful progress. To this day, the true circumstances of Jonathan's death endure as a mystery, one devoid of both justice and explanation. Moving on to the next case. Joshua Hilberling. As the sun began to set on June 7, 2011, the living room of the 25th floor apartment in the University Club Tower in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was cast in long, deep shadows. Following a heated argument, Joshua was pushed toward a window. He tried to steady himself, but the glass shattered beneath his weight, sending him plunging through. People below watched in horror as Joshua's body fell from the high floor, landing with a sickening thud on the 8th floor parking garage. Joshua Hilberling was born on May 30, 1988, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was the son of Gene and Patrick Hilberling and one of 6 siblings, Zach, Scott, David, Carrie, and Nikki Ross. Growing up in such a large family, Joshua's childhood was lively and full of laughter, marked by the imaginative games he and his siblings invented. He shared an especially close bond with Zach, who was just 13 months younger, and the two were inseparable, with Zach often looking up to and imitating Joshua. Their father, Patrick, an Air Force veteran, instilled in his children the values of integrity, discipline, and responsibility. Joshua attended Victory Christian High School, where he stood out both academically and athletically, excelling in football. Known for his charm and friendly nature, he enjoyed spending time with family and playing video games. After finishing school in 2007, Joshua decided to follow in his father's footsteps and enlisted in the United States Air Force. In early 2010, he met Amber, a young woman he would soon come to believe was the love of his life. Amber shared his feelings, and their relationship developed quickly. She had been born on October 1, 1991, in Joplin, Missouri. Her family moved to Tulsa 3 months after her birth, and later welcomed 2 more children, Adam and Ariel. Amber, with her long, beautiful blonde hair, attended Skelly Elementary School. She was not only strikingly attractive but also intelligent and hardworking, consistently ranking among the top students. Throughout her school years, she actively participated in outdoor sports such as soccer, volleyball, and track, as well as dance. She was also a member of a national nonprofit organization that supported agricultural education. After her parents' divorce, Amber's mother remarried a respected local surgeon who embraced Amber as his own daughter. Amber was a devout churchgoer, an avid reader, and a movie enthusiast, often quoting lines from films to the amusement of those around her. She had a deep appreciation for history and enjoyed writing thoughtful, expressive poetry. In addition, she had a notable passion for fashion, makeup, and shoes. When Joshua and Amber met, she was 18 and living with her mother and stepfather. Their romance moved at a fast pace, and when Joshua, then 22, learned that he would soon be stationed in Alaska, the couple decided to marry so that Amber could accompany him. They were married in the summer of 2010 in a beautiful ceremony, with one of Joshua's brothers serving as the best man. Shortly thereafter, the newlyweds relocated to Fairbanks, Alaska. Despite their excitement and anticipation, they soon encountered unforeseen challenges. Their youth, inexperience, and the isolation of their new surroundings contributed to frequent arguments, as Amber would later recount. Joshua also developed a habit of deliberately breaking her cell phone to prevent her from communicating when he was away. While some accounts suggest that Amber had a fiery temperament, as is often the case in strained relationships, the reality likely fell somewhere between the extremes. Despite the turbulence in their relationship, the couple remained in love and soon discovered that they were expecting their first child. However, on January 2, 2011, military officials received a report from Amber alleging that her husband had physically assaulted her. She told the officers that the conflict had begun when she attempted to order takeout and Joshua refused, leading to verbal insults. While she was preparing dinner, he allegedly threw a drink and a plate from her hand and then grabbed her right breast, causing bruising and broken blood vessels. These details were recorded in the official military report, and photographs of her injuries were taken as evidence, resulting in Joshua's arrest. The incident occurred during the first trimester of Amber's pregnancy, and she ultimately chose not to press charges. 5 months later, the situation worsened when Joshua was abruptly and dishonorably discharged from the Air Force for misconduct related to drug use, according to official records. As a result, Joshua and Amber packed their belongings and returned to Tulsa. Despite their strained relationship, they were enthusiastic about the imminent arrival of their child, a joy shared by both families. The couple temporarily moved in with Amber's mother while arranging permanent housing and preparing for the birth. However, this living arrangement was short-lived. Joshua's behavioral issues extended to his in-laws, who accused him of substance abuse and demanded that he leave. Although Amber was welcome to remain, she chose to accompany him. Concerned for her daughter and future grandchild, Amber's mother, Rhonda, generously allowed them to stay in one of her properties, an apartment on the 25th floor of the University Club Tower, a distinctive 32-story cylindrical building. Amber's maternal grandmother also resided in one of the units. Constructed in 1966, the building was the first major U.S. structure to employ computerization for structural calculations, ensuring its resilience against wind sway. When the young couple moved into the apartment, the building's facade and glass curtain wall panels were already 46 years old, and it did not meet modern construction standards. Their relocation brought neither peace nor relief to their marriage. Arguments continued, fueled in part by Joshua's frequent nighttime absences. He would leave Amber alone in the apartment and take the car her mother had lent them, which was intended for her use in emergencies due to her advanced pregnancy. Records show numerous text messages from Amber pleading with Joshua to return home and fulfill his family responsibilities, but he repeatedly ignored her requests. By this point, family members and friends had taken sides, each blaming the other for the ongoing strife. Amid accusations and gossip, there were repeated suggestions that the couple should separate for their own good. In early June 2011, with Amber 7 months pregnant, they seriously considered divorce, making the atmosphere in their home increasingly unbearable. The tension escalated to the point that one of them threw a television out of the bedroom window, shattering it. When they informed the building manager about the damage, they were told they would have to cover the repair costs. On Tuesday, June 7, 2011, with divorce papers spread across their apartment table, Joshua chose to skip Amber's biological father's wedding that upcoming weekend. Instead, he decided to go with friends to a music festival in Tennessee. According to Amber, he planned to use and sell drugs at the festival. Upset by his intended absence at an important family event and concerned about his questionable plans, Amber reacted angrily. After a heated exchange, she continued packing laundry to take to her grandmother's house, since their apartment lacked a washer and dryer. In a fit of frustration, she began pulling her husband's dirty clothes out of the basket. At that moment, the professional hired to repair the broken window knocked on the door. Upon entering, he immediately sensed the tension in the room. When he quoted a repair cost of $150, Joshua and Amber began arguing again. Joshua considered fixing the window himself, but ultimately agreed it would be better to let the professional handle it. With his belongings packed, he asked his father to pick him up, but his father was unable to do so. Consequently, Joshua turned to his friends for assistance. One of them, Brandon, agreed to help but did not realize the urgency of the situation. Shortly thereafter, the conflict between Joshua and Amber escalated into even greater violence. Exactly what happened next remains a mystery known only to them. On the afternoon of Tuesday, June 7, 2011, while they were arguing in the living room, 23-year-old Joshua inexplicably fell against the window, which shattered on impact. Amber watched in horror as her husband plummeted from the 25th floor. The professional who had been working on the other broken window in the bedroom heard the crash and rushed to the living room. At first, given the intensity of the argument he had overheard, he assumed that Joshua had jumped intentionally. According to his later testimony, Amber was completely distraught, crying and frantically exclaiming that Joshua had fallen and needed help. She then ran out of the apartment. Across the street, Robert, a nearby resident, was smoking a cigarette when he witnessed Joshua fall and land face down on the 8th-floor parking garage, his head striking the railing. It took nearly 3 seconds for Joshua to reach the ground, resulting in instantaneous death. Robert ran toward the apartment complex while the building manager tried to contact Armando, the professional working on the window. Meanwhile, Amber frantically pressed the elevator buttons, desperate to reach the 1st floor in search of Joshua. When she could not locate him, she looked toward the 8th-floor parking garage and realized the tragic outcome. She ran to the elevator again, this time accompanied by the building manager, who urged her to remain calm to prevent further chaos. Upon reaching Joshua's lifeless body, Amber comprehended the full gravity of the situation. Paramedics, firefighters, and law enforcement arrived, alerted by multiple neighbors. Amid tears and screams, Amber repeatedly begged them to save him, but it was immediately clear that nothing could be done. Amber continued insisting that she had not intended for this to happen, with one firefighter hearing her say that it was never her intention for events to escalate so drastically. The police escorted Amber to the Tulsa Police Department to ask standard questions and reconstruct the events of that day. She requested to wait for her grandmother before proceeding. At that moment, authorities were still uncertain about what had transpired in the couple's apartment. Unbeknownst to Amber, her life was about to change dramatically, not only because she was now a widow, but in many other profound ways. Once at the station, the police placed Amber and her grandmother in a room where they were alone and instructed them to remain calm while waiting for someone to join them. What they did not realize was that the room was equipped with recording devices, capturing every word they spoke. Additionally, an on-duty officer observed all their actions in real time. Amid her complete shock, Amber tearfully told her grandmother that while they had been arguing in the living room, she had gone to the bedroom and, upon returning, pushed Joshua toward the wall in response to his insults. He stumbled, attempted to catch himself, but ultimately fell through the window. At one point, she told her grandmother that Joshua's parents were right when they repeatedly claimed that if they stayed together, she would eventually cause his death. Amber couldn't stop lamenting the fatal outcome she had caused. Her grandmother was aware that Amber's in-laws would relentlessly pursue her, so she urged her to stay strong, especially for her unborn child. Despite following her grandmother's advice to remain silent without legal representation, the police still arrested Amber as a suspect. The next day, after securing a lawyer, her mother paid the bail and Amber was released. As the investigation continued, Joshua's memorial service was held on the morning of Saturday, June 11, 2011. Instead of flowers, the family requested memorial contributions in Joshua's name. From that point on, each family accused the other spouse of violence. Amber's claim of self-defense against an abusive husband was quickly overshadowed by the aggressive public campaign launched by Joshua's relatives and friends. The media sided with the Hilberlings, portraying Amber as a mentally unstable criminal and Joshua as a gentle man driven to madness by her. Websites appeared where anonymous people called for Amber's execution, and strangers harassed her family. On August 6, 2011, while awaiting a complex and controversial trial, Amber gave birth to her son. Close friends described him as a beautiful blend of his parents. Amber and her lawyers rejected 2 plea deals offered by the district attorney's office. One deal was a 5-year prison sentence plus 15 years of probation, and the other was 7 years in prison with 13 years suspended. Amber later told a major American media outlet that she did not regret her decision, as she was confident in her innocence and willing to take any risk to prove it. These decisions led to her being tried for second-degree murder. When Amber began attending court hearings in fitted jackets, impeccably made up and sporting disheveled blonde hair, the public and press used these details to confirm their preconceived notions about her. Meanwhile, she cherished every moment with her young son, finding peace in watching him grow amidst the chaos surrounding her case, which seemed focused on her family's financial means to evade justice. On the opposite side of her, many detractors was a page created by those who believed in her innocence. Although fewer, these supporters extensively discussed on social media the records of domestic violence perpetrated by Joshua. They also posted text messages from Amber's phone, supposedly from conversations with her husband the day before his death. On September 19, 2012, Amber filed a lawsuit against University Club Tower, claiming that Joshua's death resulted from the condominium's negligence. The document alleged that Joshua's fatal fall occurred because the window did not meet the glass requirements stipulated by Tulsa's building code. 6 months later, Amber's trial commenced. During her testimony, Amber told the jury that when she entered the living room, Joshua stepped away from the window and walked toward her. It was then, according to her, that he grabbed her shoulders with both hands. Fearing the worst, she pushed him hard against the wall between the chandeliers and the TV. To better explain, Amber drew a diagram of the push, and the court allowed her to stand in the witness box to demonstrate. The deputy district attorney began her cross-examination, making it clear to the jury that they did not need to believe Amber intended to kill her husband to convict her of the charge. They only needed to be certain that her act was extremely dangerous to another person. She added that the incident evidenced a depraved mindset. In this context, the video of Amber's conversation with her grandmother at the police station where she admitted her guilt was a key piece of evidence presented by the prosecution, despite the defense's efforts to suppress it. Additionally, the prosecutors called witnesses who claimed to have heard sounds of a struggle in the apartment, including heavy footsteps moving towards the window area. Their hypothesis suggested that Amber, despite her advanced pregnancy, had attacked her nearly 6-foot, 220-pound husband in a fit of rage, pushing him through the glass. Armando testified about what he heard and saw that day, as did the firefighter at the scene, who mentioned that Amber repeatedly said she didn't mean to push her husband out the window. An expert in windows and glass was called as a defense witness. He explained that the window in question was made of annealed glass, which lacked the strength required for residential use. He asserted that if the window had been made of safety glass, Joshua might not have fallen through it, as tempered glass is 4 times more resistant to wind loads and twice as resistant to impacts as regular annealed glass. In his expert opinion, the domestic dispute put the victim in contact with weak, unsafe, and poorly supported glass, compounded by other factors like the building's poor condition and wind pressures pushing the glass and Joshua outward. Despite the defense's considerable efforts, the jury took only 3 hours to find Amber guilty of second-degree murder. On March 18, 2013, the judge sentenced Amber to 25 years in prison for the crime against her husband. Additionally, she was fined $10,000 in order to reimburse over $6,000 in funeral expenses paid by Joshua's family. According to Oklahoma law, after 1 year, the judge could suspend part or all of the sentence, potentially granting Amber less time behind bars. Otherwise, Amber would have been required to serve at least 85% of her sentence, or 21 years, before becoming eligible for parole. Her son, then 6 years old, was legally placed in the care of his grandmother, Rhonda, and her husband, who regularly visited Amber in prison. A few months after her sentencing, a well-known American television presenter visited the correctional center to interview Amber. The program aired in 2016. During the televised interview, Amber admitted to yelling at her husband and calling him a coward during the argument that resulted in his fatal fall, but she continued to assert her innocence. The special, which included interviews with family members, police officials, and various experts, reignited public interest in the case and the controversial verdict. The passage of time did little to diminish the public's fascination with the story. The controversy intensified when the state Supreme Court questioned the tactics used in prosecuting Amber. Rhonda blamed the Hill-Burling's prominence in Tulsa for fostering certain biases against her daughter. Later, rumors regarding Amber's alleged misconduct while in custody brought her back into sensationalized headlines. The lawsuit filed against University Club Tower was dismissed in March 2015. Amber died in prison on October 24, 2016, at the age of 26. The coroner's report noted scars on her wrists and forearms and the presence of methamphetamine in her blood. According to the coroner, Amber had taken her own life. Later, her parents appeared on television, asserting that they believed their daughter had been killed by someone else. The Oklahoma Department of Corrections was subsequently sued for failing to take reasonable measures to prevent or address the conditions that led Amber to such a drastic action while in custody. The lawsuit, filed by her heirs in Oklahoma County District Court, sought $75,000 in compensation. A spokesperson for the prison system stated that the agency does not comment on pending litigation. The outcome of that lawsuit, if any, has not been disclosed. Rhonda, Amber's mother, later remarked that despite the tragic end, which no one in the family had desired, her daughter had finally found peace. She also stated that she would ensure her grandson had a fulfilling life. This case underscores the severe problem of domestic violence in the United States. The Hill Burlings had reported each other to authorities multiple times, providing evidence of injuries that confirmed their claims. However, they failed to end their toxic relationship, culminating in a doubly tragic conclusion. Moving on to the next case. Lindsay Buszajek. In this video, we examine the heartbreaking story of a woman who stepped into a trap and never came out. This is the tragic case of Lindsay Buszajek. The Saanich police are searching for something with their detectives. It's a dress. It's quite simple. It has designs in white, pink, and black. Yet this dress might be the one thing that helps solve a murder. A tall man with dark hair and a middle-aged woman wearing that same dress were spotted entering 1702 D'Souza Place to view a house with Lindsay Buszajek, a junior real estate agent who was 24 years old. But after 20 minutes, nobody had exited the house. Later, Lindsay's lifeless body was discovered in the master bedroom. Even though the house became the scene of a crime, there were no fingerprints, DNA, or any other trace. Not even a single strand of hair or piece of clothing could be located. Some believed they were strangers. Others thought it could have been someone close to Lindsay, but the best way for them to find their primary suspect was to track down that dress. She was born in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, on November 2, 1983. Lindsay was described as kind, warm, friendly, and charming from a young age. Her father, Jeff, was a real estate dealer, and Lindsay soon entered the same field. Becoming a real estate agent was a perfect career path for her because she was cheerful, smart, and approachable. All her clients felt safe and welcomed, and almost every one of them praised her work as an agent. In addition, Lindsay was dating another successful real estate agent named Jason Zylo. Jason's family was very wealthy and well-known. They owned a real estate business. Lindsay was 24 years old when the case unfolded. She was thrilled about her new career and just beginning her journey. She had been showing many houses recently, and her work was quickly moving forward in a positive direction. She had been meeting numerous new clients and arranging several promising showings. One phone call, however, would change everything for her. Lindsay had no idea that this would be her final showing. At the end of January 2008, Lindsay received a call on her personal cell phone, even though she also had a work phone. The work phone was the one she normally provided to clients seeking to buy or rent a house or apartment. This client, however, specifically reached her through her personal phone, which only her close friends and family members possessed. It seemed a little odd, but nothing that would immediately signal danger. When Lindsay answered the phone, a woman was on the other end. The name she gave Lindsay made her recall how unusual she sounded. It almost came across as if she spoke Spanish, but not quite. It also didn't sound as though she was Canadian. Because of this, Lindsay referred to this customer as the Mexicans. I thought it was a rather strange nickname, but those were Lindsay's words, not mine. Lindsay always made a note of her clients' names and the type of house they were searching for. It appears she sometimes wrote down little nicknames for certain clients to help her remember who they were. This client, in particular, had a few specific requirements. First, she needed a house immediately, one that was fully ready for move-in. There was to be no fuss or hassle. The woman told Lindsay that the couple would arrive in Victoria in 2 days and would require the house by then. Lindsay was nearly stunned when she asked about the budget. The client had a very large amount set aside for the purchase, far more than enough. Her price range for a house in Victoria was $1 million. Lindsay felt very excited. She believed the commission would be extraordinarily high if she managed to secure a great property for this client, especially since she was only at the beginning of her real estate career. To Lindsay, the whole situation felt too good to be true. Sadly, her instincts in this case were correct. Still, there was no obvious reason for her to suspect that something sinister was taking place with this client. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something seemed off. When you're this new in the business, opportunities this incredible don't usually just land in your lap. Too many things stood out as odd. The fake-sounding accent, the unusually high budget, and the urgency. On top of that, the new client had called Lindsay on her personal phone. However, it turned out that these clients had been referred to her through someone she had previously worked with. This explained how they had gotten access to her personal number, but Lindsay still remained cautious. She confided in her boyfriend Jason and her father Jeff about all her concerns, even though she had decided to go ahead with the showing. Jeff told Lindsay she was free to make her own decision and left the choice entirely up to her. She could have said no to this client if it made her uncomfortable. Jason, however, felt there was nothing unusual about the client and encouraged Lindsay to go to the showing. Moreover, he reassured her that he would be waiting outside the house in his car so she wouldn't feel alone. After speaking with Jason, Lindsay felt more at ease and selected a few properties for the client who had $1 million budget. That was how Lindsay came across a house in Saanich. The meeting was scheduled for February 2, 2008, at about 5:30 p.m. The day of the appointment arrived quickly. It was a Saturday. Earlier in the afternoon, Lindsay and Jason had lunch together at a nearby diner. Around 4:30 p.m., Lindsay went home to prepare for her meeting with the client. Jason, meanwhile, went to a car repair shop to take care of another matter. For some reason, the two decided to head to the house separately. Lindsay was on her way to meet the clients at the property. Jason was running late with a friend at the car shop, but intended to arrive shortly after Lindsay. He texted Lindsay to apologize for being late and assured her that he was on his way. "Okay, I need to go. People from Mexico are here," was the last message Lindsay sent to Jason. At 5:38 p.m., Jason texted her again, saying he was almost at the house in Saanich and on his way. Lindsay would never read this message nor respond to it. Jason parked in front of the house around 5:45 p.m. without thinking much of it. As it turned out, he had his friend from the car shop with him. When Jason pulled up to the front door, he noticed a man with dark hair standing there with his back turned to him. The front door was wide open. Jason and his friend lingered outside for about 10 minutes. Eventually, Jason began to feel like he was acting as a nosy, overbearing boyfriend. So he decided to take the car for a short drive. When he reached Torquay Drive, he still had a clear view of the house and its front door. He waited another 10 minutes and then sent Lindsay a text, telling her he thought everything seemed fine. But like his earlier message, this one was never read, and Lindsay never replied. He also saw both the man and the woman in the white, pink, and black dress return inside. At that point, he said nothing seemed alarming. It was only after 20 minutes that Jason began to feel concerned. It should not have taken Lindsay this long to finish showing the house. Jason walked up to the front door, which was now locked, and peered through the stained glass to spot a pair of high heels in the hallway. They were Lindsay's shoes. They looked like she had taken them off hastily because they were lying on the floor. This immediately alarmed Jason. Why would Lindsay remove her shoes just to show a house? That suspicion made Jason call 911, while his friend circled around to check the back of the property. While speaking to the operator, Jason attempted to push open the front door and even knocked on it, but it would not budge. His friend soon rushed back from the rear of the house and reported that the back fence was wide open and the back patio door was standing open as well. After telling the operator what he planned to do, Jason hung up and prepared to enter the house. He remained at the front door while his friend unlocked it from the back. When Jason stepped inside, the house was eerily silent. Where was Lindsay? He walked down the hallway, went upstairs, and eventually stopped at the master bedroom. There, Jason discovered his girlfriend lying dead on the floor, brutally injured. Lindsay Buzayak, just 24 years old, was gone. Jason immediately called 911 again, this time requesting police and emergency services. Soon after, paramedics and detectives arrived, but Lindsay could not be revived. Authorities declared her dead at the scene. She had sustained more than 40 stab wounds. Further investigation uncovered chilling details. Lindsay had not made any attempt to defend herself. None at all. This strongly suggested she had been attacked from behind and had no idea what was coming. The thought alone is chilling. Lindsay had already sensed that her new clients were not right. They seemed too good to be true. On top of that, investigators found themselves at a dead end. As far as anyone knew, Lindsay had never met these clients before. They were not friends, nor were they people she knew well. So why was Lindsay attacked with such ferocity? After seeing the excessive number of stab wounds, police felt certain about one thing. The killer was filled with rage. The assault on Lindsay was violent and personal. The perpetrator had intended to make sure Lindsay would never walk out the front door alive, which was devastating. At this point, detectives had only one mission: to track down the person responsible for Lindsay's murder. On the quiet street of D'Souza Place, a real estate agent had been slain. The story quickly spread throughout Victoria. Crimes like this simply did not occur in such an affluent neighborhood. It sent shockwaves through the community, especially among real estate agents. The notion that killers posing as clients were hunting for blood was terrifying. Suddenly, real estate no longer seemed like such an attractive career. All eyes turned to investigators, who were under pressure to deliver answers. The public wanted those responsible to be caught and brought to justice. Hearing that Lindsay had died in such a horrific manner was devastating for her family. They simply could not believe it. Lindsay had been enthusiastic about her work, doing what she loved, and now her life had been taken. Jeff was heartbroken and determined to see justice served for his daughter. The first step investigators took was to examine Lindsay's phone. For the most part, everything appeared normal, except for two key details. The first was that the supposed client had contacted Lindsay on her personal phone. This fact convinced police even further that the client must have known Lindsay. Details like this stood out clearly. The second and far more unsettling discovery was that Lindsay's phone had dialed a number not saved in her contacts. At 5:41 p.m., her BlackBerry placed a call to an unfamiliar number. Detectives theorized that this was the exact moment Lindsay had been attacked. During the struggle, the phone might have been jostled in her pocket, accidentally pressing buttons and initiating the call. This clue became an important lead. Additionally, the lockbox on the house registered a timestamp of 5:29 p.m., later confirmed by police. That was when Lindsay and the clients had entered the house. Witnesses near the property reported seeing Lindsay outside with a man around 6 feet tall with dark hair and a middle-aged woman who had blonde hair and wore a dress with pink, white, and black stripes. Neighbors observed Lindsay greeting them with a smile and shaking their hands, giving the impression they were acquaintances. They then saw the three enter the home together. However, no one ever saw the couple leave from either the front or the back. This corroborated Jason's account of spotting the two clients near the doorway when he arrived in his car. The following step for police was to thoroughly search the crime scene. Unfortunately, it did little to advance the case, as the killers had been exceptionally careful. They didn't leave any DNA, fingerprints, or other clues that could help the cops find them. Even though they didn't want to say it, the cops knew that the people who killed Lindsay had a very well thought-out plan. They also asked Lindsay's family and friends if she had any haters or people who might want to hurt her, but they didn't find out anything. There didn't seem to be anyone who didn't like Lindsay. The police had no choice but to look at the phone Lindsay used to get the strange call in the first place. It turned out that the phone he used to call Lindsay was a burner phone that he bought in Vancouver under a fake name a few months before the attack. This proved planning ahead. The terrifying attack on Lindsay had been planned for a long time. Interestingly, the phone was only used once after it was bought to make that terrible call to Lindsay. Also, the police learned that the phone had been turned off after the murder and hadn't been used since. Pings from the cell phone also showed that it had taken a boat from Vancouver to Saanich. The cops thought that the phone might have been bought as part of a plan to kill someone and then thrown away after the crime. Also, it turned out that the client gave Lindsay a fake name. Then, the police looked at the house itself, as well as the business that owned it and other things. They did find something strange after that. Lindsay was showing her customers a house on D'Souza Place, a street with only 4 houses. The house that tragedy happened was on the edge of the cul-de-sac. The street named D'Souza Place was named after a guy named Joe D'Souza. Shirley Zillow, Jason's mom, knew Joe through business. As you may remember, Jason's family owned a successful real estate business and knew everyone in the business. Now, the police were suspicious that the house Jason told Lindsay to show her clients, even though she was scared, was actually owned by a friend. When the police got this new information, they quickly changed their attention to Jason and the Zillow family of people. Witnesses agreed with Jason's account of what happened, but the cops still didn't understand some things. So why would Jason show up late to the house if he knew that his girlfriend didn't like the new client? After lunch, he should have offered to drive Lindsay right to the movie. What the cops also thought was very strange was that Jason ran straight to the master bedroom as soon as his friend opened the door. Why did he do that? How did Jason know this was where Lindsay would be? Most of the time, people search the whole house for the victim before they find them. But Jason went right to the spot where the body of his girlfriend was found. There were questions asked of Jason and his friend almost right away after Lindsay was killed. The cops were able to trust him, and he even passed a polygraph test. But he wouldn't give them a DNA sample. The inspectors had no idea what to do. The case was quickly ending because they couldn't find the murder weapon, which didn't help. That is, until someone came forward with some very interesting details about Lindsay's connection with Jason. That guy was Jeff, Lindsay's dad. He told the police that Lindsay was thinking about ending her relationship with Jason because he was possessive, jealous, and controlling. Things got worse. In December 2007, Lindsay told her dad that she had seen something she shouldn't have while she was with him in Calgary. We don't know what Lindsay saw, and neither does Jeff, but after almost 2 months, Lindsay was picked out and killed. No one still doesn't know who made the strange call, or how they planned and carried out a whole murder plot in less than 15 minutes. But there are a few ideas that police, bloggers, and even regular people have come up with. The first idea is that it was a planned hit. There are no fingerprints, DNA, or other signs that point to anyone else being involved in Lindsay's murder, so it seems like it was done by a professional hitman. People who knew Lindsay, her work, and her routine very well are thought to have hired a hit person to do something bad to her. The clients were there to do the dirty work. There is a huge plot hole in this idea, even though it makes sense. Someone who works as a hitman and doesn't even know who Lindsay is would attack her more than 40 times. Even though it's sad, wouldn't a gun or something long-range have been better for a paid hit? It looks like Lindsay was killed out of love because of the type of cuts she had and the sheer number of them. It was planned that someone would kill Lindsay in a very personal and direct way. The second theory is a little crazy. It has to do with illegal drugs, drug trafficking gangs, and telling on people. Do you remember when Lindsay went to Calgary in December 2007? It turned out that right after Lindsay left, there was a big drug bust in Calgary in January 2008. A lot of bad guys and drug sellers were caught and arrested, including Erickson Lopez de Alcázar, who was a big name in the drug ring. What does this have to do with Lindsay, though? Okay, phone records showed that Lindsay called an ex-boyfriend's friend while she was in Calgary. The friend was actually Erickson's family member. We're not sure what the call was about, but soon after it, illegal rings were found and people were caught. A few months later, Lindsay also died. People thought Lindsay was a police snitch who told on some shady people. So Lindsay's murder was planned by a drug gang as a way to get back at the people who lost so much money in Alberta's biggest drug bust. So was it a plan by the cartels to get back at them? Did Lindsay die because she told on the police? Well, the people in charge of the Lindsay case don't think that. They looked into this option, but it was ruled out right away. It didn't make sense. That sounds like something Lindsay would not have wanted to do. To restate, Lindsay's attack was personal. It is true that reporting someone to the police can end badly very quickly, but there was no evidence of this, and the police also did not uncover any connection between Lindsay and these illegal drug gangs. However, the next theory is quite interesting. It concerns Lindsay's boyfriend Jason and his mother Shirley. Jeff, Lindsay's father, has already spoken harshly about Jason. From the beginning, he found it strange that Jason remained in the car while he clearly saw the unknown man at the front door. Jeff believes Jason should have taken action, even if only to make his presence known. It also did not make sense for him to move his car away from the house. Additionally, there is the matter of going directly to the master bedroom. And last but not least, that fake Spanish voice Lindsay heard on the phone that day. Surprisingly, this accent resurfaced in a peculiar way. Nikki, one of Lindsay's friends, received a late-night call from an unknown number. The woman on the other end spoke in a strange, fabricated, artificial Spanish accent that strongly resembled what Lindsay had heard. Nikki could not recall what the caller discussed once the call ended. However, Shirley, Jason's mother, answered the phone when she dialed it back multiple times. Nikki was left feeling very unsettled and confused. Why would her boyfriend's mother be the one to call her? How did she even get her number? Shirley was unbothered. She explained that she had been attempting to reach her personal assistant, whose name was also Nikki, but the calls had been mixed up. Nicole assumed that Jason must have given Shirley her number when she asked how she obtained it. Later, however, Shirley firmly denied that this call had ever occurred. We do not know whether the police investigated this or not. This raised a serious question. Could someone close to Lindsay, either a friend or family member, have been responsible for her tragic death? There is no way to be certain, but it does sound unsettling. The most troubling aspect of this case is that no one has yet been charged with Lindsay's murder. Considering the evidence that has emerged so far, One possibility seems very probable. Yet the authorities cannot charge the man or woman who were likely behind the attack, simply because they do not have enough proof. The police only had a real lead regarding the woman they observed at the crime scene. Her dress was a peculiar color. It required a great deal of time and effort for the authorities to locate either the dress or the woman who had been wearing it. Yet they never discovered either, so they were forced to abandon the search. Jeff Buzayak, Lindsay's father, has not given up hope, and there has been some advancement in the case recently. Therefore, all hope is not lost. We are now closer than ever to resolving this case. Jeff has played a very active role in the investigation because he created a website dedicated to Lindsay's murder. The site contains an online forum where individuals can exchange information and theories about the case. This very website is what led to a highly unusual post about Lindsay's death. In August 2017, nearly 9 years after Lindsay was murdered, someone posted on a site, "I killed Lindsay and stupid cops will never prove it." Now, this could have been done for attention or another motive, or it might have been written by the killers themselves. We truly cannot know. It was nevertheless an intriguing post. The Saanich Police Department and the FBI only recently, in 2021, announced that they have new leads in Lindsay's case, thanks to advancements in DNA analysis and other technologies. For now, the specifics remain confidential. Based on what I currently understand, the investigators must have uncovered something left within the house that contained a minute trace of DNA from when the case first began. Lately, police have been able to employ genetic genealogy to resolve many homicide cases that had long remained unsolved. This case may be no exception. However, genetic tracing can take an extremely lengthy period of time. Still, there remains hope. We are simply waiting to learn what the next course of action will be that the police intend to pursue. Jeff and Lindsay's family and friends have endured immense suffering over the past 15 years. It is long overdue that they finally discover who murdered their daughter in such a horrific manner. For Lindsay, Jeff, and every person close to her, I cannot help but feel that justice lies just around the corner. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.